Hello and welcome to Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from the Straight. Well, it's Melbourne Cup week, Tim. It was an extraordinary Melbourne Cup result in many different ways. I don't think you or I could have had Knight's choice in our first 23 picks for the Melbourne Cup, but it's an amazing race, and that's the Cup, eh? It can produce some extraordinary results, and we saw that on at Flemington on Tuesday.
Absolutely, Bren. I thought it was, pocket talking, not great, but for the race itself, the battlers, just a fantastic result. It's what the Cup's all about, is that anyone can have a go. And the bolter got up. As I said, I couldn't pick it on form. I thought he was a miler, and good luck to John and Sheila. And from the pictures I saw and what you described in your stories covering it, it wasn't a complete shock to the trainers.
Absolutely, it wasn't. Sheila Laxon is somewhat of a genius. She turns up in 2001 with Ethereal and wins a Melbourne Cup, and then doesn't turn up with a horse for 23 years, and then shows up another horse, this time trained with John, her partner, from who she met back in those days when she was training Ethereal, and John was training Ballaspree, and 23 years later come back and win a Melbourne Cup again with a rank outsider. And a horse that they always believed in, that she always believed she's doing. She is a master trainer, Sheila. I reckon if she had probably better access to horses over the years, we'd probably be talking here in much higher terms in terms of number of Group 1 wins, because she clearly has an understanding of horses and how to make them work. And to get an extreme choice, a horse by extreme choice out of More Than Ready to stay a 3,200 metre distance. Pedigree people can talk as much as want. It's an extraordinary result, and one which probably got people like you and me would make us shake our heads if you consider, what we've seen Extreme Choice do over his first few crops, where he's been a really dominant sire of horses, generally up to that sort of 1,200, 1,400 metre, with the exception of an Oaks winner. But yeah, it's quite remarkable, isn't it, Tim?
Absolutely. I saw on social media last night that Midnight Pearl, the dam of Knight's Choice, ran seventh in a Tower Cup. Looked at the photo and I thought those colours look familiar at the back there, I owned one that ran last in that year's Cup. And just incredible how the journey that mare's been on. And again, I saw there was no black type winners in the first five dams, and now Melbourne Cup winner, Wink Skinny's winner, with extreme choices. I'm sure the mayor's got a bit to do with it, but it just proves what a dominant stallion Extreme Choice is and how rare he is. And obviously, there's not many of them as well.
Yeah, and if you go back to the form, like go back 2 generations to Reduced Choice, from Extreme Choice, he had the capacity to produce horses of staying performance, despite the fact he was a fast and precocious horse himself. So I guess it's not completely surprising, but he's the first Australian sire to produce a a Melbourne Cup winner since 1999. So it's been 25 years since we've seen that, and it's only the fourth Australian bred horse. But I guess the other thing, just to sort of touch on briefly, was the ride from Robbie Dolan, and the story about Robbie Dolan. Obviously, he's come from nowhere, in terms of not nowhere necessarily. He was national prominence as a singer. He was singing on a cruise a couple of years ago. I met Sheila and John on the cruise, and now he's turned up at a Melbourne Cup and pulled off one of the all-time great Melbourne Cup rides, coming from the clouds. And yeah, it was an extraordinary finish, and that last 100 metres was among the most thrilling we've seen in a Melbourne Cup for a long time.
I think we like to be pretty serious on the straight and tackle the hot topics, the business of racing and wagering and breeding. But I guess that the fact that he is known mainstream through The Voice and things like that, again, I think that's great for the racer's profile and the everyday punter and just non-punters as well. That someone like Robbie come from Ireland and was able to win Australia's best known race and the biggest race.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a great story. Robbie was up for the moment, and with Ronan Keating being there and being part of that, like somebody who he idolised as growing up, and it's just it was the Cup produces remarkable stories. I guess the question I'm asking, Tim, and it goes off the back, of the fact that we're very much enamored with sprint racing in Australia, and I guess we've talked ourselves out of the fact that our best horses can win the Melbourne Cup because of these big European pedigrees. As I said, for only 4 Australian bred horses this century have won Melbourne Cups. If you look at those horses, a lot of them have European pedigrees in the background. Do you feel like perhaps we're not giving our best horses a chance to go to these races and show them up where we're sort of been intimidated out of it in that regard, Tim?
Uh, to a degree, I guess there's, again, it takes as we know with the vet checks, for a stay to even get to the Melbourne Cup and train them, it's a big effort. They've got to qualify, so a lot has to go right, no matter their breeding. Uh, if you buy a yearling, and this is why people don't tend to breed them, you're not. Yes, you might hope it's a Melbourne Cup horse, but you're also hoping it's a Derby horse or it's going to win a Champagne or a JJ Atkins at 2. So it's a fine balancing act to try and get a trainer to say, yeah, look after it, show patience, but at the same time, I'm paying, can be up to $100,000 to have a horse in training in the city now. That's, if you wait till it's 4 and 5 before you really get stuck into it, that's a hell of a lot of money on top of a purchase price. If you bought it from a major sale, it might have averaged 300,000, 250 to 300,000. You just can't expect the everyday outside the absolute uber wealthy owners to keep putting their head in their pocket without knowing if the horse is any good for 3 years.
Speaking of uber wealthy, $2.3 million they were offered for Knight's Choice after he won the Winx Guineas. Obviously, Hong Kong interest. So I want to put this question to you, Tim. It's an interesting one. I've been thinking about the fact that well-performed 3-year-olds in Australia who win stakes races sort of in that, I guess, 1,600, 2,000, even up to Derby range, they often get targeted by Hong Kong interest and quite often get sold to Hong Kong because of that. And then because of the Hong Kong Derby being effectively a 4-year-old race, those horses can progress to Hong Kong. And I guess you take the money. And look, let's face it, 99 out of 100 people would have taken that offer for Knight's Choice. Cameron Bain probably didn't need to take the offer, but $2.3 million is a lot of money. But is that possibly proving a sort of sabotage point for Australian bred success in the Melbourne Cup? The fact that these, I guess, 3-year-olds with somewhat of a stamina or staying predilection, I suppose, are now being sold off, to Hong Kong. And we're just probably not seeing those horses come through as we might have sort of 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. Particularly you look at, maybe the New Zealand breds that possibly could make up running the Cup and those lead up races. And, if they win, if they trial well, they get sold to Hong Kong. That's, and vet well's a pivotal part of that. But so that's a factor. But also, speaking to Hong Kong owners and agents and trainers, it is a lot harder to still even buy the Knight's Choices and those, the Sandown Guineas winner might be under offer, or even that 1,400 metre race on Cup Day that Katogia, I think, won it, that Rosemont Quinella could come under offer. But if they're owned by a big syndicate, if you've got 5% and the money mightn't make any difference to you, you bought a horse to have fun, you finally got a good one, why would you sell it? And that's what they're encountering. It's finding more and more difficult to convince owners to sell their horses.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting.
maybe there is a slight change, but as I said, it's only a small proportion of horses that are good enough and sound enough to make the Melbourne Cup.
But as I said, 99 times out of 100, an owner probably would take that deal on Knight's Choice, and that horse doesn't win a Melbourne Cup. So it's interesting how those little decisions, those little, I guess, sliding doors moments can affect how racing pans out. Moving now to the other side of the spectrum, the sprinters. Tim, really interesting to see Storm Boy headed to the Northern Hemisphere to be trained by Aidan O'Brien. He's a horse that garnered a lot of headlines. We first broke here on the straight that he was part of a deal for Coolmore, which was, with kickers on top, would be worth up as much as $50 million, but was probably about $20 million up front. They've probably found that he's maybe not quite up to the best sprinters here, and there's an opportunity being quite justified to take him to the Northern Hemisphere. I guess it's an interesting strategy. What do you think of the strategy, and do you think it's something we might see more of going forward, Tim?
Well, it's got to have the right horse and the right ownership group to do it, but I think they've got nothing to lose by trying it. In the autumn, there's no 3-year-old Group 1 sprints. They've got to take on older horses. We've seen with Merchant Navy go up there, a very good horse, but my mind, not a superstar. And he went up there, and Aidan, he acclimatised, obviously, and was able to win a couple of group races and obviously at Royal Ascot. So, Storm Boy might relish it up there with that justified breeding and the Aidan O'Brien, just different style of training outside of, a commercial Randwick track where there's 800 horses all in and out very quickly. So it'd be interesting to see. All the owners appear to be from. Spoke to Mitch Cunningham on Tuesday. They've got a significant share in the horse from, they bought him as a yearling. He's going to, they're all on board for this, and hopefully he can show up at Royal Ascot and maybe the July Cups, and even they're talking about this time next year for the Breeders' Cup in the States.
Yeah, and Coolmore are always ambitious with these things. What I find interesting is immediately after Switzerland's dominant victory in the Coolmore Stud Stakes, I guess publicly Tom Magnier and Chris Waller were a bit sort of like, well, we'll see how he goes and we'll see how the horse comes back. But they said to one another, literally a foot in front of me, Royal Ascot, here we come. What happens if Storm Boys, in front at the furlong and coming down the outside in Switzerland? I mean, it would be very fascinating to see in that situation. I'm sure it's a problem that Coolmore would like to have. But if Switzerland were to knock off Storm Boy in a UK Group 1, it'd be a very interesting set of circumstances, wouldn't it?
Well, it's something that Coolmore I wouldn't say used to, but it happens sort of regularly enough. Even their champion City of Troy in the Breeders' Cup was knocked off by a horse that they co-own as well. So, that's the beauty of numbers, I guess, that if one doesn't show up, they've got another bullet to fire. And I suspect Switzerland will be very competitive over there if they do eventually decide to take him over.
Where would you put him, Switzerland, in terms of the best sort of spreading 3-year-olds we've seen? Certainly on that performance in the Coolmore Stud Stakes, it was one of the more dominant performances. Probably similarly dominant to Home Affairs, but probably arguably a better field maybe than what Home Affairs beat in the same race a couple of years ago. Well, I mean, what do you feel he's how much upside has he got as a colt? And if he can go and dominate, win races, win another Group 1 race in Australia, and then go overseas and win Group 1 races over there, it makes him a massively valuable horse, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not a ratings expert. I'm not Dan O'Sullivan, far from it, or any of those guys, but I do subscribe to Ratings to Win, Paul Daly's software, and so I went back through the last 4, and Switzerland's rated well above Osmosis, In Secret, and Home Affairs. So, Switzerland did have a knee or bone chip removed after the slipper, and when he first came back, jury was out, but obviously Chris Waller got him right, and he produced an awesome performance on Saturday. Assuming he's sound, which every reason to think so, he should. I think he would be highly competitive in anything he contests. Next preparation, you only have to take a line through Asfura. Again, Henry Dwyer's mare won at Royal Ascot this year. Really consistent top mare, but she's, that's why Henry took her over there, was not quite up to winning Group 1 sprints here, and very few options over 1100. So, yeah, I'd have to be at this stage, I wouldn't be betting 6 months out, but you'd have to be confident Switzerland and even Storm Boy would be around in the money.
Yeah, I mean, would there be any other of those colts or 3-year-olds or even other Australian sprinters do you think would work well, overseas next year? Or is there just too much money in Australia, for these horses to go over there? Look what Bella Nepotina's earned this year by, staying put and doing what she's done. I mean, I guess there's the glory of winning a Royal Ascot and winning these big Group 1s overseas, but there's so much money on home soil, isn't there?
There is, but again, it comes down to the connections, doesn't it? Coolmore's got the global outlook, growing empire. If he was able to come back and win, don't know whether he's sharp enough for Lightning, but maybe that, or a new market. You'd think he'd be highly suited to a new market. If he was able to knock that off, and then maybe Mr. Zhang and Yulong look to go to Royal Ascot. He's got interests in Europe, possibly shuttle him. Zoustar was in Europe and shuttled reasonably successfully. So
And a
maybe
Breeders' Cup winner on the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. So there's possibly some appeal there where, if growing empire, he does need that Group 1 to cement his place here and at Yulong in Victoria. But if he can, win a new market, I think Merchant Navy, did he run third in a new market and then went straight across to Aidan O'Brien? So it can be done. I think it was as the rating suggests, I think it was a fairly strong field. So in growing empire, I think it's a lot of upside. I think it was his 5th run for the prep off an Everest, a big effort. So he'd have to be high up in betting for a new market.
We're moving now to more racing political areas, I suppose. In a week we talked about racing a lot on the track. Off the track, the Rosehill issue continues to bubble on. We've had a confirmation this week from the ATC that the vote by the members has been pushed back to April. It was initially intended to be held at the annual general meeting later this month. It will now be held in April. So, Tim, this issue sort of seems to boil along, and there's always little bits and pieces coming out. Um, I guess if you're a betting man at this stage, and I know you are a betting man, but if you're a betting man on Rosehill per se, and you're framing a market on the likelihood of the members, well, first of all, the members putting their hand up and say yes, which ultimately leads to the fact you have to have the members' approval apparently to get this over the line. What's the likelihood of any of this Rosehill proposal, which we've talked about now for over 12 months now, nearly 12 months, going ahead?
It has to be a long outsider. Not getting up has to be, long odds on. I'd suggest, as you said, the ATC board and Peter McGorran, the chairman, promised the members, but there would be a vote by the end of this year. That's not happening. There's been talk that, there has to be another track, built to replace Rosehill, which would be the brick bit, which in lots of coverage seems implausible and just won't be happening. So for the members to vote it, I would say it has to be, it has to be 20 to 1 that the members would even vote in favour, particularly if it has to be 75%.
Yeah, that's still not clear. I mean, some say 50, some say 75, but good to get some clarification. I think the ATC are pretty confident it's 50%, but it was mentioned in the Rosehill inquiry it might be 75%, which seems highly unlikely. I mean, we've just seen a 90 to 1 shot win a Melbourne Cup, so nothing's impossible, but it would seem that the sentiment's flowing the other way, doesn't it? And we've got these sort of other bubbling issues along. There's been documentation which we're covering at the moment on the straight around about what was spoken about Warwick Farm in the initial space, and that Warwick Farm was supposed to be the replacement. Racing New South Wales had expressed concern about Warwick Farm as a direct, I guess, replacement for Rosehill, and then by the time it was announced in December last year, Warwick Farm was sort of in the background, and a couple of months later, we're talking about a racecourse being put in a frog sanctuary in the brick pit. So it's the whole. It's been a complex amount of issues, and I guess if they were to prosecute this argument again, the ATC from scratch, I dare say they do things differently, Tim.
Absolutely. I'm confused, more confused now than I was when this story broke nearly 12 months ago, that like Warwick Farm in all the inquiries and reports I've heard is not up to scratch. Even if it was money was invested to improve it, administrators have said it's just not suitable. And now potentially there was talk that Rosehill effectively could be moved, for want of a better term, to Warwick Farm. So what's your take out of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was initially discussed. It was kind of mooted in early drafts of the press releases that were released under parliamentary papers earlier this year, Tim, that were basically call for papers, which is an order which gets out all the information that's out there. And the Cabinet Office had revealed that in the drafts of the press releases was discussed where Warwick Farm was. There was a key meeting between Peter V'landys and Russell Balding and the Cabinet Office sort of a week after Steve McMahon and the ATC had met with the Cabinet Office, where V'landys and Balding expressed their concern about Warwick Farm and that whether it was suitable or not. And it appears from there that they moved away. I think also Racing New South Wales been pretty adamant all along. They don't want, they don't want to lose a race course. They want a new race course somewhere, and they've got to be able to achieve that. So I guess that's probably where this washes out at, and that Warwick Farm's probably not up to scratch. But if you've got to just sit there and have Warwick Farm there, what's the point of having it there? Like, it is a big chunk of land in the middle of Western Sydney, albeit, I would think probably flood prone because of the proximity of the Georges River, and a few of the other issues that they may have around there in terms of housing. It's okay for obviously racing and training, but it's a bit different when you're trying to build a housing estate. So there's, I just sort of place the question about what do they do with Warwick Farm? There was an argument during the inquiry that they haven't painted the fence for 15 years. Now, they're not going to paint the fence. How are they going to fix up the track and sort out the stabling and everything else? And don't forget, Racing New South Wales have invested in properties around Warwick Farm in order to try to, what they say is protect the thoroughbred footprint. There's a few other discussions around, facilities there and what they're going to do. We've got Inglis, who've got a significant presence there and have invested heavily in that space as well. So I guess as much as this inquiry brings up a lot of questions about Rosehill, It brings out a lot of questions about Warwick Farm as well and where that sits and how Sydney has a second premium track or not, because Canterbury's not the answer either, and what happened. So, my goodness, Tim, there's a lot more answers than questions. Sorry, a lot more questions than answers being generated by this whole discussion. You've got to wonder how long we can go through this. And as I said, I'm with you. I would think it probably 20 to 1 that the members put their hand up and say yes. And it's probably, 50 to 1 that this goes ahead at some stage. But we've talked about it a lot. It's exposed a lot of, I guess, different opinions around where things sit. Generated a lot of headlines, a lot of headlines for us, to be fair, so which has been good, but it's something to talk about. But I think there's a challenge there to convince people that this is the right approach. And if the ATC don't land this approach and don't make this happen, what does that say about where the ATC sits? And that's probably the broader question, isn't it, Tim, about the way that organisation is structured and resource going forward, I suppose.
Well, it's incumbent on the ATC board, which are divided in themselves. So, but it's incumbent on them when before it goes to a vote to come out with clear, concise information about what it all means, how much money they will get, when they'll get it, what they'll do with it. So the members can actually vote clear with all the information in front of them. Whether that can be achieved even by April, who knows? But yeah, as you say, more questions than answers, and some questions may not be able to be answered at all.
Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. We'll be back again next week. Make sure you stay tuned to thestraight.com.au for all your latest in racing, breeding, and wagering news.